a number of representations from constituents who live near to the Sandpiper Hotel who are really worried about their local community turning into a battleground. We've already not only got a protest scheduled for Sunday, but also a counter-protest from Stand Up to Racism. I think that there's very real issues about immigration and about asylum, but I really don't think that turning Whittington into a battleground on Sunday is going to move the case forward at all. And so, I'm meeting with the organisers of the protest. It looks likely that it's going to go ahead, but have the conversation because, I think more conversation and less conflict is valuable in what is a very toxic environment at the moment.
Yes, it's a toxic environment, Toby Perkins, because people feel that they're not being listened to, and your government and the previous government, to be fair, have totally lost control of our borders, have totally lost control of our asylum seekers. And the last time I checked, it's perfectly legal to protest in any way you want. It was the Labour Party who were totally up in arms about the previous government saying, let's ban the pro-Palestine protests. You can't stop people protesting. We just about still live in a free democracy.
I'm not suggesting I can stop them protesting. Of course, they have the right to do it, and no one's disputing that. I'm appealing to them to consider whether it's actually what people in that community want, and I'm pretty confident that it's not. But I think that in terms of the broader questions about our asylum system, it is absolutely legitimate to say that there's far too many coming in. Nigel just referred to some of the measures that the government are proposing. For the first time, we have a deal with France where people can be detained and returned. It's only a pilot, it's early stages, but we're going to be returning people. And the biggest thing that's going to make a difference to these numbers is asylum seekers being sent back, and then people in those communities discovering that even when you spend thousands of pounds paying these criminal gangs, it doesn't always work. So we have, it is important that we get a grip. But we don't need
Toby
misery
Perkins,
on the streets of Whittington to achieve it.
Toby, the problem we've got is that for all the all the good intent that Shabana Mahmood may have, there's a pitiful amount of people been deported. I think it's 3 or maybe 4 if we're lucky, and over 31,000 have arrived illegally since the Labour Party came into power. It doesn't add up. It's not one in, one out. We're still being swamped, and whatever you do, you're not getting a grip.
Well, there's 35,000 people have returned since Labour came to power. This pilot that we're on about is right at the early, right at the start. And obviously we need to prove the concept. We know there will be lawyers trying to stop it, and we need to make sure that we have the legislative ducks in a row. But once we get this pilot going, I think it will be one tiny measure in a whole programme. We're looking to interrupt these criminal gangs. We've seized huge numbers of boats that were on their way. We've seen back in June 9 people who were involved with these criminal gangs locked up for a total of 64 years. So there's a whole raft of different things that need to take place here to get on top of this. The government are literally only just over a year in power. I share the frustration of my constituents. We've had 43% of the hotels that were housing asylum seekers return to normal usage since the peak. The government are committed to ending hotel usage, and I absolutely support that. So, I'm in the same place as my constituents.
Britain is fracturing, and a live television exchange just proved exactly how deep the cracks go. A Labour MP from Chesterfield recently appeared on GB News, not to defend government policy with confidence, but to appeal for calm in his own constituency. Streets in his area are bracing for protest and counter-protest over an asylum seeker hotel. And instead of projecting authority, Toby Perkins arrived looking like a man who already knew he'd lost the argument before it began. Here's what this moment actually reveals. When a sitting MP from the governing party has to go on national television and plead with people not to turn his constituency into a battleground, that is not a communications problem. That is a collapse of public trust. And no amount of talking points about France pilot deals and criminal gang prosecutions changes that fundamental reality on the ground. The government's position is straightforward on paper. Deportation deals, smashed criminal networks, hotels being wound down. Progress, they say, is happening. But British voters are not living inside a government briefing document. They're living in towns where asylum hotels opened without consultation, where communities feel bypassed, and where their concerns were dismissed for years by the very political class now asking them to stay calm. The GB News host landed the sharpest blow of the exchange, and it wasn't complicated. Over 31,000 illegal arrivals since Labour took office. A handful of deportations. A pilot scheme still in its infancy. Whatever the government's intentions, the numbers tell a story that is impossible to spin. When the gap between rhetoric and reality becomes that wide, public anger doesn't wait for policy to catch up. And this is why the protest was always going to happen. When people believe they're not being heard by those with power, they find other ways to make themselves heard. That is not extremism. That is democracy operating under pressure. Labour now faces a brutal choice. Accelerate tangible, visible action on immigration. Not announcements, not pilots, not promises, or watch more of these flashpoints spread from Chesterfield to every town with an asylum hotel and a community that feels invisible. The real question isn't whether protests can be stopped. It's whether the government can move fast enough to make them unnecessary. So far, the evidence suggests they cannot.